For years, Nora Whitmore had learned to become almost invisible whenever she was around her family, smiling at the right moments, applauding her older brother's achievements, and swallowing every sharp comment because challenging them always seemed to create more trouble than staying silent ever did. But on the night of her grandmother's 75th birthday at the elegant Bellamy House in Charleston, South Carolina, Nora arrived with a secret of her own, and before the evening was over, the people who had spent years overlooking her were going to discover that they had completely misunderstood the woman sitting quietly at their table. The celebration began beneath crystal chandeliers and strings of warm lights, with relatives filling the long dining room and praising Nora's brother, Daniel, for becoming the youngest regional director in his company's history, while their parents proudly repeated the achievement to anyone who would listen. Nora smiled when they toasted him, but when her mother leaned closer and whispered, "Some people are simply meant to stand in the spotlight, sweetheart, while others are better suited to supporting them," Nora merely lowered her eyes to her glass, because she had heard versions of those words so many times that they no longer felt like insults. They felt like an old family rule she had finally stopped trying to break. Halfway through dinner, Daniel announced that his company was preparing to purchase a struggling chain of historic hotels across the Southeast, and their father immediately began telling everyone how his son had been chosen to help lead the expansion despite knowing very little about the project himself. What nobody at the table knew was that Nora had spent the previous 6 months quietly working with an independent financial advisory firm that had been hired to investigate the same acquisition, and she had uncovered a dangerous pattern in the company's accounts that could turn the celebrated promotion into the biggest disaster of Daniel's career. When her aunt jokingly asked Nora what she had been doing lately, her mother answered for her with a laugh, saying, "Oh, Nora keeps herself busy with little consulting jobs," and several relatives chuckled as though her career were an amusing footnote compared with Daniel's glamorous corporate life. Nora was about to let the conversation move on when her phone vibrated against the table, displaying a message from a number she recognized immediately. "The emergency board meeting has been scheduled for tomorrow morning. They need your full report tonight." Nora quietly excused herself and stepped onto the terrace overlooking the dark gardens, where the humid Charleston air carried the scent of jasmine and distant rain, and she stared at the message for several seconds before realizing that tomorrow could change everything. She had discovered that the hotel acquisition depended on financial projections that contained deliberately concealed liabilities. And worse, several executives had ignored the warning signs because they were desperate to complete the deal before the end of the quarter, meaning that if Nora's findings were correct, the company could lose millions within months. Before she could return to the dining room, a silver-haired woman in a navy suit approached her from the hallway and said, "You must be Nora Whitmore," introducing herself as Evelyn Grant, the chairwoman of the advisory firm that had commissioned the investigation, and unexpectedly, one of the most influential members of the company's acquisition committee. Evelyn then looked toward the dining room and asked, "Is that your brother Daniel at the center of the celebration?" And when Nora nodded, Evelyn gave a quiet, almost sympathetic smile before saying, "He has no idea how much trouble he is walking toward." Nora returned to the table just as Daniel received another round of congratulations, but this time she noticed something different in the way he looked at her, as though he had overheard enough of her conversation to become suspicious. A few minutes later, he followed her into the corridor and demanded, "What are you involved in?" And Nora calmly replied, "A report your company should have read before signing anything," causing Daniel's confidence to disappear as he whispered, "You knew about the acquisition." To which she answered, "I knew enough to know that you should be asking better questions." Next morning, Daniel arrived at his office expecting another ordinary strategy meeting, only to find the company's chief executives, attorneys, auditors, and board members gathered around a conference table with Nora's financial report displayed on a massive screen. As Nora entered with Evelyn Grant, the room fell silent, and when the chairman asked her to explain how she had discovered the hidden liabilities, she calmly walked everyone through months of evidence, showing that several properties carried undisclosed debt obligations, unresolved lawsuits, and maintenance costs that had been intentionally excluded from the projections. By lunchtime, the acquisition had been suspended, an internal investigation had been opened, and Daniel had been removed from the negotiations until the board could determine whether he had known about the financial discrepancies, while Nora was offered the position of leading the independent review team. That evening, when Daniel called her and said, "You could have warned me before all of this happened," Nora paused before answering. "I tried warning you for years that I knew what I was doing, Daniel, but you only noticed me when my work became impossible to ignore." A month later, Nora returned to Bellamy House for another family gathering. But this time she didn't sit at the far end of the table or wait for someone to acknowledge her, because she had finally understood that respect was not something she needed to earn from people who had already decided how little she was worth. When her mother quietly apologized and her father admitted that they had underestimated her, Nora accepted their words without bitterness, then smiled and said, "I don't need you to finally see me as important. I just needed to stop living as though your opinion determined whether I was." And for the first time in her life, she left the table without wondering whether she had done enough to deserve her place. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.